everybody. How's everybody doing today? My mental health warriors out there. I want to thank everybody for tuning in for episode 2 today. I'm super excited. To kind of give a recap about what happened on December 20th. But before I get to that point, I want to say that if anybody out there is interested in sponsoring my podcast, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me through my email at clifford.w.bauman@gmail.com, or you can reach me through my website at cliffordbauman.com. You can just scroll down to the bottom, and from there you can send me a message directly. I hope everybody had a good holiday season. I hope everything went well for everybody. If you watched my last podcast, and I want to thank everybody who did watch my last podcast, I might have seemed a little, disheveled or maybe distracted or something. So, it was important for me to do the podcast on December 20th. That was the 19th anniversary of my suicide attempt. And it was also my first podcast, and it was kind of dear to me in my heart to do it that day. What I didn't talk about in that podcast is what happened to me that morning to my older son. And there's a photo of him in his football outfit. And then you'll see another photo of with his arm, what happened to him. So my Monday morning started out normal. I was getting my stuff together. I got my youngest son off to winter camp at his school. And my oldest son left earlier to go to a wrestling practice. He's on the wrestling team there at Colgan High School. And I'm in my workout outfit, and I get Lloyd off to his winter camp, and I get home, and I'm getting ready to go downstairs to work out because that's what I do. It's one of my mental health tools I have in my toolbox. And so I get downstairs, and my phone rings. It's my son calling, and I pick it up, and I say, "Hey, Cliff, what's going on?" He's like, "Dad, I'm sorry, but I hurt my arm. I don't know what's going on with it. I was wrestling, and it popped. I don't know what happened." And so the trainer gets on the phone, and she's like, "Mr. Bauman, I think he needs to go be seen by a doctor." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" And so my son is double jointed in his elbow. And so I thought he just popped his elbow in and out. He's done that before doing Taekwondo. And she goes, "No, it's below the elbow." And at that time, I kind of figured the worst. So I go to the school and pick him up, and we leave, and we go to the medical center. And so while we're at the medical center, my arms, the trainer did a great job wrapping his arm up, but we get into the x-ray, and the x-ray technician's just trying to get him to, lay his arm flat, and he can't do it. And so I'm standing behind the x-ray technician, and that's when I get the first picture of his arm. And he did break both bones in his left forearm. His one bone was shoved up underneath the other one. It's a pretty bad break. You can see from the photo right now. They were able to put it back together 3 days later. He had 4 plates and 8 screws in his arm. But so this happened on Monday. So Monday I get him back home. His arm is still broken. They cast it. And so I get him home. I have to go pick Lloyd up from winter camp. Lloyd wants to know what's going on with brother. For y'all you don't know, my wife's active duty Navy. She's living in Rhode Island right now. I'm in Virginia with the boys, being mom, dad, and everything, right? It happens to us in the military. You stay in long enough and you get married, you're going to be separated. And so, then Monday I get on, I film the podcast. I only know how to speak from the heart, and that's usually what I do. To go further on, so Tuesday is a pretty normal day for me. Pretty excited to get the boys up. Lloyd's not going to winter camp, and I have to call a buddy of mine to make arrangements for Lloyd to go spend the night with them while Junior's going to surgery up at Bethesda at Walter Reed Hospital. And so Wednesday night rolls around, Lloyd's at my friend's house, me and Junior's at home, and about 8:00 at night, Junior's like, "Dad, I don't feel too well." I'm like, "Well, I thought he was nervous because of his surgery, right?" And about an hour later, he starts throwing up. And then so he's got a stomach virus. And I was like, "Oh man." And it wasn't an hour later, it hit me. And I'm puking and pooping, and it was bad. I mean, it was the worst I've ever had in my life. And it goes on all night long. And so Junior finally falls asleep. He throws up about 6, 8, 10 times. I'm sorry to be graphic. I'm still going both ends. And finally, I wake him up at 7 a.m. because we have to leave to drive to Bethesda, Maryland, which is about 50 miles from my house. And so I get him up there for his surgery. and everything's fine. He's doing good. But literally every 15 minutes, I'm running to the bathroom still because I still be infected by all. And he was in surgery, supposed to have been 2 hours. He was in surgery for almost 4.5, 5 hours because his arm was broke worse than what the doctor could see on the x-ray. And so it was pretty rough. We get home Thursday night. He's doing fine. Friday, Christmas Eve, my wife was able to leave and come in from Rhode Island, from Rhode Island, which I was, by that time, I was mentally and just physically exhausted from being sick and being at the hospital all day. And so she gets home, and Saturday rolls around, and Christmas is fun. We're all opening up our gifts, and everything's going well. Junior's arm's doing quite well. The amazing thing is they never stuck a cast on his arm. He had a splint on the front and back of it to keep it stabilized. But the doctor says we won't cast it because we want to keep the swelling down. And so I was just amazed by that. So Junior had a little thing that he had to sleep in and his medication and stuff. And so his little brother had a great time helping his older brother open up his Christmas presents. Lloyd is 7, so that was a good deal for him. So, we get through Christmas, everything's fine. And about 1:00 in the morning, Lloyd comes into the bedroom and says, "Dad, I don't feel well." And so there we go. Now Lloyd's throwing up. Lloyd has diarrhea. And so he goes through the whole day of that, the rest of the night into the morning. And I was like, "Well, honey, I'm sorry, but 48 hours later, and here it comes." And then she catches it. And she probably had the least worst of all of us. So that's kind of how my winter break went. But, being the mental health warrior I am, I was able to get through it. It's just one of those things that happened. Junior is now 3 weeks post-surgery. His arm is healing fine. He has no cast on it. He has nothing on it. The doctor said his bone's stable from the titanium plates and screws they put in it. He started physical therapy today, so that's good. He's kind of getting his life a little back to normal as he can. The good thing is he had no nerve damage with his arm from the break, so that really helped his healing. And let's face it, he's 17, so 18 now. His birthday was January 5th, so he'll be able to heal and go on and be fine with everything. So that's great, positive. So that's kind of, if you watch my podcast, you'll kind of understand now, knowing the background information, what went on with me that day. But being the mental health warrior I am, I had to push through and push on and get out there and talk about my suicide on that day, and what ultimately led up to that point. And so I'm going to get to where I left off on the first podcast in a little bit, but there's some other things I just kind of want to talk about before I get to that point. I want to give a shout out to my older brother. He's 4 years older than me. He ran, I think this is his 20th marathon, but he ran the Disney Marathon down there this past weekend. He completed it. You'll see the photo of him there finishing it. So big shout out to him. Funny thing in my family is my older brother and me and my younger sister, we all enjoy running. Now, I don't do marathons, but I do run the Army 10 miler. I do that for myself. Running is a way for me to kind of go out and kind of reset my thinking and my thoughts. And I do it for fun. I don't do it for any other reason. Some days I may run 1 mile. Some days I may run 4 miles. I may run a fast pace, may run a slow pace. I just run however I feel that day. But when you have PTSD, you really have to learn how to deal with your triggers. And that's kind of why I wanted to start this podcast. And as I go through it in other episodes, I'm going to talk about some of the tools that I have in my toolbox that I found that's been helpful for me in my struggles with post-traumatic stress syndrome and my TBI injuries, which I don't really talk about my TBI injuries much, but I think I'll probably get into that a little bit more here on this program. I am still receiving treatment at the Intrepid Center at Fort Belvoir for my TBI. And they've really made a lot of great strides and really helped me in dealing with it, because it can be frustrating when you have PTSD and TBI and you're dealing with all that. And I know there's some of my veterans out there and soldiers who may still be serving who's dealing with that. And so I feel your pain. I know how frustrating it can be on days. And we just have to learn how to deal with those frustrating days and know that, later on, better days will come up. So if you watch my last podcast, I talked about, how I got from being such a happy-go-lucky kid. I had a great childhood. We were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. We were never hungry. We lived off the land, and we hunted, fished, and trapped. And I talked about the pet vulture we had, and just kind of how my life was. And when I joined the military at age 17 and had a good military career, then 9/11 happened. 9/11 affected a lot of people. Then affected people who weren't even at the Pentagon or the World Trade Center. Just seeing it and dealing with all those things today, or the fear, had a profound effect on a lot of people, and a profound effect on me. And so to kind of recap what I talked about on the last podcast, I talked about my childhood. I talked about some of the things I did in the military early on. And then, I talked about, me going up to the National Guard Bureau and working there at the National Guard Bureau in Crystal City. And then obviously being at the Pentagon on 9/11, being the first person there, and then what I did, on the 11th, the 12th, and early morning of the 13th. And if you remember when I talked about, when I was on the first podcast, when I talked about when I finally made it home on the 13th, I was just, I was just mentally and physically exhausted. I mean, I'd been, in the Pentagon crawling over, I don't want to go in great detail, but, pieces of things, airplane parts and other stuff, and never really had a chance to think about, process what I was seeing, what I was dealing with, because I was just so focused on trying to find somebody alive, or trying to help somebody. And of course, in my case, everybody I found was deceased. I didn't find anybody alive. And when I finally made it home, late on the 13th, and I talk about this, and I take my hat, boots, and gloves off, and I put them in a box, and then I finally take my uniform off and throw it in a wash. And, I didn't really reflect, but then I got in the shower and I started taking a shower. And that's really the first time I kind of broke down and was just emotionally exhausted and cried. I cried like a baby in the shower, just realizing what all I had seen and done, and the guilt that I was already starting to feel from not finding anybody alive. And then also, my family was finally able to get a hold of me, and so they wanted me to, what were you doing? What's going on? For 3 days, they couldn't get a hold of me. And so they kind of wanted me to talk about what I was doing. I really didn't want to talk about it. And so it became hard for me, because I just wanted to forget it. And I think anybody who's been through a traumatic experience, I think that's a mechanism your brain kicks in, where you just try to shove it in a closet. You don't talk about it. But it's hard, right? Because you don't want to be rude to your family or friends. They're just being curious. It's not their fault. They're not trying to be mean or vicious or anything. They're just curious about what happened and your perspective on it, because you were there. And so I got pretty good at just kind of glossing over things on, what happened and what went on after that. And then as time, went on from 9/11, from the 13th on, and, work got pretty normal. But for me, it didn't. For me, I was at home, and I was a single at the time. I wasn't dating anybody. Well, I was dating somebody, but we won't talk about that. But so really, I at work I was fine, but then when I would get home, I'd start having those thoughts of everything I saw and did. And I wasn't really a big drinker. I'd maybe drink a beer or two at night. And it's kind of a slippery slope I was going down. I started drinking maybe one beer, then it was two beers, and then it was, maybe a scotch along with the two beers, or, and it just slowly started getting worse and worse, because I knew when I was going to go to sleep, I would start having dreams. And those dreams were nightmares that would always wake me up. And I never wanted to go back to sleep, because I wanted to stop seeing that. And so my way of dealing with that is I started drinking to the point that I got drunk enough that I went to sleep and I didn't remember my dreams. That has its own ramifications, because now I'm self-medicating myself. And so as time went on, I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, right? So my attitude at work started changing. And so I talked about this a little bit in the podcast, in the first podcast. So, but when I would go to work, my work started getting sloppy, right? I started making errors on staff actions, on, spelling errors, graphical errors. I used to go down and have lunch with the team, there at National Guard Bureau, the guys I worked with, and I stopped doing that. I would eat at my cubicle. I just started getting more and more withdrawn. I get drink water. So one of the guys I worked with, he was a retired 06, and I got to know him pretty well. he pulled me off to the side and he's like, "Hey, Cliff, what's going on with you? Something doesn't seem right. You're not acting like you should." And man, you want to talk about red flags go up for me. I'm like, "Hey, what are you talking about?" "Nah, I'm fine. I'm just a little tired. I stayed up late watching the game, or yeah, I'd always make an excuse why I was acting the way I was." And that went on for a couple of months, and finally he got tired of it. And so he went and talked to the colonel, and I was a W-2 at the time, CW2. And so the colonel said, "Hey, Cliff, yeah, something's not right. Something's going on with you. We want you to go see about getting help." And whoo, boy, that was that. No, no, because back then in 2002, the military wasn't too supportive of people going to mental health, and a lot of people know this. Is you would go in, they put you on 60-day medical orders, and that 60 days they were starting the process to chap you out of the military. I mean, that's just how they did it. They don't do it now. It's a lot better now than it was back then. Luckily, my leaders supported me going to get help, and they never went down that road, or I never would have continued my military career from that point forward. But I went into counseling, and so, I'm sitting there talking to the psychiatrist, and they're having me talk about, my dreams and this and that, and I'm very guarded. I have a wall up. He never broke that wall. I made him think he did, but he never did, because all I wanted to do was get that check in the block that I'm A-okay. I can go back to fit for service and everything. So I did every single thing he told me that I should be doing. And I got very good about lying to my therapist, which we all know was the wrong thing to do, because that ultimately led up to my suicide attempt. And I was lucky I survived it. But I was very good at that. And then I got very cautious on how I did things at work, right? So I noticed people were noticing my behavior. So I had to change my behavior at work. So what did I do? I stopped having lunch at my desk. I would go downstairs like I used to and have lunch with the team again, if they were doing that. Or if they were going out after work, I would go out with them. And then another thing I started doing was, to keep myself from being tired, I started to consume more caffeine to kind of keep me awake and kind of keep me alert at work, so they didn't see that. And then I would get home and I would take a nap. So it'd be 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening. I would take a nap, so then I could stay up late and drink, and then go to sleep. Then I wouldn't be as tired the next day. And this was a vicious cycle that just went on. And I got to the point where I would sleep maybe 2-3 hours a night, and that was it. And then right back up and at work again. Try to keep focused, but you can only do that for so long. Your body's going to break down. And I think it was just, we had the anniversary of 9/11, the 1-year anniversary. And I talked about this on the first podcast. And so if you kind of think about how my mental being is over that time, right, over the year from 9/11 and going into the first year anniversary, where I wasn't sleeping, I was drinking more. Now I got to be more cautious at work, so the stress levels building up. I had to kind of keep myself, kind of like this at work, and don't snap at people. I had to really focus on my emails and on my staff actions to make sure there's no more mistakes. And so even going to work and getting up and going to work became very stressful for me. And then it was my family, the closer 9/11 came, they wanted to call and talk to me, how you doing, what's going on, and then, I'm sitting there in the 1-year anniversary, and I don't remember what paper it was, and I talked about it. I pull it up, and they got photos of the victims of 9/11. They're kind of talking about their families. And there was, the lady in there that I talk about that I, crawled over half her body. And really that just skyrocketed the nightmares and the things that I was dealing with. I mean, it just went tenfold. But I wasn't seeing my therapist anymore, because I had already checked the block, right? And so I was fit for duty. So I wasn't seeing him anymore. So when all this, the mountain's getting high, it's about ready to have that avalanche. And so as I'm going through all this and dealing with it from September, now it's October and it's November, and then I left and I actually went to, I think it was anti-terrorism training or something there at Fort Leavenworth. And I just stayed at my brother's house. And then when that training was completed, I was just going to take Christmas leave and stay there, until the first of the year. Sorry, I still got got this voice thing going on. But and so so and so I'm doing my training. I'm at my brother's house, and then, of course, in the other episode I talked about kind of what led up to my suicide attempt. But I didn't go into great detail, and I'll go into a little bit more detail tonight about it. And so I finished up my anti-terrorism training. I'm at my brother's house. He lives there in Kansas City, Missouri. He works at Truman Medical Center, which is about 5 miles from his house, a mile from his house, very close to his house. But he leaves and goes to work, and I'm sitting there by myself. And he's got this old grandfather clock in his living room. He still has it there, and you hear how they tick and they chime on the hour and whatever. And I'm sitting there in the dark, and I'm drinking. And all those thoughts and things came rushing back to me while I sit in that room and just listening to that clock tick, 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 tick. And I felt like I was a failure because I was unable to find anybody alive. And so internally, that just kept building and building up to me. And I get asked this a lot when I do my speaking events. Really, what were you thinking at that moment when you decided you didn't want to live no more? And I'm very honest about it because that's the only way I know how to be. Is I tell them I was tired, and I was tired from the stress of work, the stress of portraying who I was at work, the stress of constantly explaining to my family and friends that I'm okay, everything's fine, reliving the stories of 9/11, dealing with all that. And then the guilt of not finding anybody alive. And even though I knew that when that plane hit, if you didn't get out in a certain amount of time, you just didn't survive. I mean, that's how bad that explosion was. But my brain just wouldn't let that go. And I'm sitting there, and I don't know how many drinks I had. I was drinking scotch, I don't know, probably 5 or 6, I'm sure, by this point. And I showed kind of what I wrote on the note in the first podcast. And I wrote it on a napkin. We had that for a lot of years. I don't really know what happened to the original note. My brother had kept it for a while. But, they talk about all the signs that somebody gives when they attempt suicide. And I would say that if you ask my family, and my brother talked about this when the Able channel did a documentary on me, it's the first time he ever did an interview about my suicide attempt. First time he ever talked about it. And this was just last year they did it. It's been released now, and you can go to theablechannel.com and see the trailer for it. But, they asked him about that. And he said, there were signs, not so much as suicide, but just signs that he was stressed or upset about certain things. But I would never have thought that he ever would have done that. I wasn't giving things away. I wasn't being overly nice to people that I wasn't nice to before. I wasn't making amends with nobody. So I was just that small piece of I was done. And I don't know what caused me to be done that night at my brother's house on December 20th. I talked about that. I was done. I just did. I didn't want to live with it no more. And I didn't feel like I was a burden to my family. I didn't feel none of that. I was just done. I was tired. I was just done. And I remember writing the note, and I had a bottle of sleeping pills. And I think they said I took 20 or 22 sleeping pills. I don't remember how many. I took enough it would have killed me. And I get asked this, what did I think about after that? And in my mind, I was peaceful. I don't know if it was the effects of the sleeping pills taking over me. Maybe that's why I felt that. But, as I was drifting off, dying by my own hand and kind of going in and out of consciousness, for that moment, I felt, some level of peace. And then my next thought is, waking up in the hospital, I had this bright light in my eyes. And what happened was my older brother, and if you saw videos, if you've seen me speak, I talk about this. He just gets a funny feeling at work. And so he picks up the phone and he calls me, and I didn't answer. And because I didn't answer, what prompted him to rush home and get me, he found me unconscious on the couch and he rushed me to the hospital. Took the note, had no idea, for sure how many sleeping pills I had, because he didn't count them before. I mean, who counts people's pills? And so, we get to the hospital, I'm kind of waking up from everything. And, the first thing I see is my brother, the bright lights. And for a split second, I thought, my God, my brother's God. What's going on here? It's just that moment of coming out of the fog and all the medication they give me. And I joke about that because it's kind of funny, but it's not, but it is. Because I wouldn't be sitting here had he not got that funny feeling at work and come home and save me. And so as I'm coming out of that fog, and they're giving me all kinds of medications and stuff, and I start realizing, man, I fucked up. I fucked up big time. And so it really kind of scared me because, I almost took my own life, and I really didn't want to die. Right. But at that moment, they call it a coupling effect, when everything couples together, when somebody decides they want to complete suicide. And that's different for everybody. That's why the Army has a hard time with all the training and all the money that the services have spent. Why are the suicide still rates going up? And there's many, many reasons for that. And I'll get into that in another podcast. But when a person gets to that point that I got to, right, I went from A, and as close to Z as you can get without completing. That's deep and personal to them. What we have to do is get to veterans, soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, whomever, before they get to that point. And I say this all the time to people, if you don't think you're important to somebody, and they want you here tomorrow, and pick up that phone and give them a call, because they love you and they really, truly want you here. And so as I'm coming up out of that fog, and I realized what I did. I looked at the look on my brother's face, and then my parents show up at the hospital. You can just imagine their panic and feel on their face, knowing that, their son, tried to complete suicide. And it's something they didn't see. And of course, they were very scared. They were not upset or mad at me, but they were just upset at the situation, as any parents would be, or any siblings would be. And so as I start waking up from that, and they're visiting me and stuff, and of course the psychiatrist is coming in, and as you know, that if you attempt on your life, you have to go and spend 72 hours locked down in a mental ward. And so as I leave the hospital, I take an ambulance ride over to the state-run mental ward and get all checked in there. And then on my next podcast, I'm going to talk about what it's like to spend 72 hours in a locked up mental ward, wearing a hospital gown, sleeping on a mat on the floor. And my experience there, being around people that have problems that way out mirrored anything that I had going on in my life at that time. And that stay in that mental hospital for that 72 hours, as bad as it was, really set my path to recovery, and was really the first steps of me becoming a mental health warrior. I want to thank everybody that watched my podcast tonight. I want to thank Todd for supplying the music that you're going to listen to at the end. And if you're a veteran out there and you use music as a way to deal with your PTSD, the issues that you have, and you wrote your own music, I would love for you to send that in to me, and I'll pick a couple and I'll play them for 2 podcasts. I think it's a great tool. I'm not musically inclined, but I love to listen to music. Just make sure that it's your own written music, because there's copyright, infringements that go on that if you just sing somebody else's song, but it has to be your own written song. Todd's not a singer. You can hear it, you listen to it, but that's how he found, that's how he dealt with his PTSD. He went to I talked about it in the first podcast. He went to a group there, and the group got him into music, and he learned how to play the guitar, and that's what he does. He actually gave Lloyd a guitar, and Lloyd's going to start guitar lessons next week on a Wednesday. So Lloyd was excited, and Todd kind of taught him a couple of strings while we were visiting him, and so that's a great thing, and Lloyd's super excited about that. And so if you're a veteran, please email me. It'll be up on the screen, and send your music to me, and I'll be absolutely sure to play it. And I want to thank everybody for the time. I want to thank you for watching this podcast, and I want everybody out there to be a mental health warrior that you are. And be safe and take care.
When your girlfriend met your wife, or how that biker dude almost took your life. I like blue eyes crying in the rain, stuck in Folsom Prison listening to a train. Who's gonna fill their shoes? And a boy named Sue. How much your cowboy hat means to you. You're walking on the fighting side of me. How much you miss old Bobby McGee. You wanna play country music, you need to slow that guitar down. Tell us about the tear in your beer, how your woman done you wrong. I like that one about the day when your girlfriend met your wife, or how that biker dude almost took your life. Hopping on the bus to get on the road again, I'm going out drinking with all my rowdy friends. Walk the streets of Bakersfield, Pappy brewed white lightning in the hills. No God-made honky-tonk angels, picking, dueling banjos, guitars and Cadillacs, man up front dressed in black. You wanna play country music, you need to slow that guitar down. Tell us about the tear in your beer, how your woman did you wrong, or how much you miss old Johnny Cash.